Okay, so as we all know, the elections in Greece last Saturday were literally an electoral earthquake for European standards. Firstly, because we have a complete collapse of the main ruling parties who sustained all the austerity measures during the past 2 years, and as well, a spectacular rise of all anti-systemic forces who which have refused the austerity measures and which represent a completely different political view both for Greece and for Europe. So I would like just to give some main, not interpretation, but some main directions to think and to give some background as well. So I'm not going to talk long. I would just like to steer the conversation in an interesting phase. And I think that the question, how did we get here? How, after 30 years of dominance, virtually like in the UK, of two main systemic political parties, we arrived at a complete collapse, first of all, and secondly, at the spectacular rise of the left. And I think that there are both long-run and short-run dimensions. Greece, I will start with the long-run dimensions, which I think are of interest for all the kind of social democratic left of the past 30 years, because I think that all the social democratic left in Europe and in Greece as well, which was represented by the PASOK, basically based themselves upon a huge lie. And that huge lie was that it was possible to keep everybody happy. So on the one hand, we had, keeping the part of keeping happy the kind of popular classes by channeling borrowing, extensive borrowing, either privately or through the public sector. And on the other hand, we could afford providing tax cuts for the upper classes, or we could afford not doing actual redistribution. So I think that in Greece, the PASOK can very easily be compared with Peronism, for those who know, in Argentina once upon a time. And it managed to create a very broad social base drew its electorate, going from popular classes, which was channeling some form of social policies, or allowing different forms of black economy, etc., in order to keep somehow the lower classes up with growth, and on the other hand, it could keep as well the upper classes happy by not doing actual redistribution. And I think this is where as well the Greek debt comes from. It's from this kind of social contract which was a populist social contract indeed, in the sense that it wasn't actually doing redistribution by attacking the wealthy, but it was protecting the wealthy, and in the meantime, borrowing in order to keep as well the lower classes kind of happy. So this is the long-run dimension. This broke in 2010. Okay, so in 2010, both political parts of Greece, because as well the right wing kind of followed this pattern too, had to make a historical choice. There was no possibility to keep both things together. So Greece went virtually under bankruptcy, and evidently in that situation, the PASOK and New Democracy, so the two main parties, decided to go on the side of the wealthy. So in short, to make the lower social classes and the middle class pay for this crisis. And regardless of what we think of, the German politics or the IMF, etc., the Greek elite and the Greek political elite made that historical choice. So basically, we had this collapse of the social contract, this kind of dirty social contract upon which the two parties were based in the past 30 years. So in a sense, these elections were the first elections in which the Greeks voted according to their conscience, not because a politician was offering their kid or their cousin or their uncle, some job in some private public or private sector entity, not because of clientelistic relationship, but people went and voted, with their conscience. And this was the result. And I think it's important to understand that regardless, of the more short-run dimension. So there is this aspect. There is another aspect which is evidently economic and social. So as you know, Greece is undergoing a terrible recession imposed by the Troika, so by the IMF, the European Central Bank, and the current West European governments. And the numbers are currently reaching, this year we will reach figures of USA under the Great Depression. So we are talking about a GDP reduction which has already reached 16% in 4 years. We are heading for 21, 22 this year. Under the Great Depression, the United States went through a recession of 21.8%. So we need to understand the dramatic condition of the figures, which means as well a huge amount of social despair, a virtual destruction of the middle class, or anything that was remaining of the middle class, which evidently plays an important aspect in the results of this election. And regardless of the negative side, which was that part of this vote went, of the decaying, if you want, middle class, which went to the extreme right, much more went to the left. Okay, and this is important to highlight because there has been a lot of, hoopla in, the medias here in the UK that, oh, look at the extreme right, but nobody's saying, oh, look at the results of the left. I don't say it's a positive evolution. I'm just trying to balance the two things. The third dimension has been an increasing political resistance by the people and of democratic resistance, not only in terms of economic rights, but in terms of political rights, because in the past year, we have been governed by an unelected government. So the two main parties did kind of constitutional acrobacies in order to be able to impose their policies because they were collapsing, essentially. But there has been an incredible amount of political and social resistance with vast reunions in squares, in neighborhoods, and numerous political movements such as civil disobedience movement, basically refusing to pay for some things that should be considered as public goods, etc. So I think it's important to understand as well that the electoral results of the left are an outcome of these social movements. I think it's a pretty bottom-up process rather than an electoral result that creates a process. Okay, it is here as a result of this. Now, just a brief words on what next. Well, I think that there are big debates within the left, but regardless of the political preferences, I think that for social movements, regardless of what happens, it is important to continue building grassroots resistance, both in the workplaces and in political meetings or in the public squares, etc. Because even if we look at historically what happened with governments of the left, there are pretty contrasting results. Okay, and we need to be aware that even under a positive scenario, which would be the constitution of a left-wing government in Greece, the only ones who can continue imposing the change are the people, the workers, or the unemployed, or however you want to call it, so the vast majority of the population. I should remind you that for example, in the Popular Front in France in 1936, most of the historical reforms of that time were not imposed by the government, okay, but it is the movements that impose these to the governments. And the other aspect is that we don't know what would happen politically if the left was to come to power. And therefore, resistance has to be there regardless of that. Alternatively, if a left-wing government starts being corrupted by the power, again, people have to be there to be sure, okay, that it is steered in the right direction. Now, for the economic dimension, there is, I would say, a pretty open class warfare in Greece right now, but there is also a terrorization of the population relative to what will happen if left-wing government comes to the power. So this terrorization comes into the form of false dilemmas, like the one get out or stay in the Eurozone, but if you stay in the Eurozone, you will follow our recipe, or saying that if we get out of the Eurozone, we won't have anything to eat, or we won't have, like if the Greek economy didn't exist before its entrance in the Eurozone. Apparently, we're living in caves before that. So this is the economic dimension. But still, there is an extremely strong media disinformation relative to all the positions of the left, or relative to even economic policies, which, in the UK are absolutely mainstream, for example. So the exit from the Eurozone is not something that is considered as revolutionary in the UK. You have very respectable neoliberal writers in the Financial Times, for instance, that are pleading for an exit of the Eurozone. But in Greece, it is a symbol of the radicalization of the ruling class vis-à-vis the left, vis-à-vis social movements, vis-à-vis workers, and vis-à-vis collective rights. And finally, a word on the political dimension. I think that right now, there has been a lot of talk that the parallel of the Greek situation right now is the Weimar Republic. So it's the 1930s in Germany. I don't like these kind of metaphors, but what I want to say is that if there is one aspect which is similar to the Weimar Republic, is that with the collapse of the traditional big parties, the last protection barrier to the extreme right now in Greece is the left, both in the neighborhoods, in the workplaces, but as well politically. And if the left fails, probably, more probably than not, we will have an extreme right scenario. And I have absolutely no doubt that the ruling class of Greece will support them, in front of the left, because this has always historically been the case. Thank you.
Perfect. I think Olivier has pointed out very well what it means to have a systematic crisis, a system crisis, so deep embedded within the society, economically and politically as well. Everything, as it has been described in the past by some revolutionaries, everything that seems stable now melts away. And in these situations, as has been described now by Olivier, but seeing every day in the news, we see all the basic elements that could be described in the textbooks as a potentially pre-revolutionary situation or something like that. I don't mean that there's a revolution tomorrow, but all the elements are there, and just needs only one spark in order to sway things either one side or another side, for a revolution or a counter-revolution, and everything that comes with it, with the destruction of what was happening. So we saw one evident collapse of the three main parties of the austerity and the memorandum. Apparently, one statistic says that they lost 3.5 million votes. Something more than almost half of the electoral votes have swayed from the main electoral parties to other parties opposing austerity, and that's something to keep. It was not something that was out of emotion. It was an emotional change in the minds and hearts of people. It was more likely something that translated the past very tense, very concentrated 2.5 years of strikes, occupations, assemblies, anti-austerity movements, and everything that people had in minds, in their hearts, all their actions, because for the first time, as Olivier said, it was not passive voters, but they were active people, active citizens, active workers, active students. And this was a qualitative change that I think will be there, and it remains to be seen how much it will be incorporated and get concrete and stays in the left. And this also could be seen how it was, how this change towards the elections was seen, was reflected outside Europe. We had here, some of us have been involved in the solidarity movement for Greece with the Greek resistance. With groups like We're All Greeks outside the Greek embassy, making meetings, making small or big demonstrations and protests, and it actually we captured some of the sympathy for not only for the evil that has befallen the Greek people, but actually more about the resistance that the Greek people is showing and this spirit of fighting back, which is actually so the way for a wider layer of anti-austerity struggles here, and show a lot of sympathy, especially within trade unions and the campuses and universities. So I mentioned that the movement, this movement was reflected in these elections, and many people have been. There seems to be a dynamic further. This was not this was not a static thing. I think that we see this dynamic unfolding as we moving on. I don't know if you've heard today they've finally realized that we're going for new elections in a month's time. So this means a new era, a totally different change of scenarios. After we've been through a week of speculation, of attacks, of threats, of intimidation from the European Union, from the mainstream media, Greek politicians in that matter, and everybody who had an interest of the Greece descending into chaos, and as a result imposing a default again, not for once, again to the Greek people as well, which means lowering the wages, not paying the pensions, as a boogeyman against the threat of leaving the euro, or actually taking the reins of Greece's own economy, for that matter. So, where do we go from now, and how do we use all this vote, which was swayed to the left? I will remind you that there was a big left towards the party of Syriza, which was a coalition of left forces, which captured the minds of people and some of the audience in the left. And as a vote, which ranked very high, like up to 16–17%, there was the stable vote of the Communist Party, which, with its stance, stayed around the same percentages of up to 8.5% or something like that, not being able to capitalize on the movement. And also there was this anti-capitalist left, the Antarsia Party, who for the first time tripled and managed to get in the political map, scoring 1.2% in the general vote. And there's a whole discussion within the left now that has gained the first part of the votes. I'm coming to the extreme right wing and the rise of the fascists in a bit. The answer, like, how do we move forward? How the left positions itself, and how the leadership of the left, and actually the everyday men and women who voted left, who have been participating in the assemblies, in the meetings and the strikes, how does it see his or her own dreams coming true? For all the struggles that have happened. And my answer to this is, like, nothing has stopped with the elections. We saw the crisis deepening, so we will have many more strikes, many more actions to do, many more initiatives to be taken by the left. And so I would suggest that the left should not sit down and discuss what's going to happen only about taking the government, but as Olivier very, very nice pointed out, if anything is going to happen, it's going to be imposed and pushed if there's a movement on the streets, not waiting as passive voters for the election of the savior government, but on the contrary, whatever they're going to try, either another technocrat government, another coalition, maybe putting the fascists even higher, giving them a ministry or something like that, they will know they will find a block of people, the block that have been giving the struggles all this time, against them. And a presence of a movement in the streets with common initiatives from the left on the street level, in the universities and in the workplaces, will keep also the democratic left, the more moderate left party that has gone into government the last days, and Syriza itself, keeping it on the right path, on the radical path, and not giving into all the pressures to subdue to what the Europe says, to what the media are suggesting, or what exactly the Greek ruling class would want a left party, complacent, cooperative, and giving into all the pressure that they are willing to offer. So at the same time, within the left, I think we should keep, because nothing has changed with the elections and there are things coming up, we should keep our political debate at such a high level, but at the same time, we should not be sectarian to each other, in the sense that now that every time they attack any of the left parties or the anti-fascist struggle that has been unfolding for the last months, we should be able to take initiatives, defend the left, defend the program, because it comes from the bowels of the movement. It comes from these basic demands that are coming up, have first appeared, many of them have been voted within trade union assemblies. Most of the programs that are now being adopted, for example, the cancellation of the debt, the Greek default, and things like that, have not come up out of the minds only of some economists and some from the political leadership of the parties, but also have been voted in some trade unions. Also, the demand for for the protection of the unemployed, or even the demands of the prohibition of new layoffs. All this needs to be safeguarded, and only common action and common initiative within the left is the way to go forward, especially at these times. So, in my opinion, we shouldn't wait in order to see this for 30 next days. When we posted this, when we made the poster for this meeting, we didn't know there's going to be new elections. But I don't see any difference that after the election, this 30 will pass like this. These 30 days will go very quickly, and the questions we will be faced will be much harsher, more stronger. The pressure on the left to be to fall back and to fall back into the system and subdue to the terror will be much stronger. So, and the only way to defend against this, I think, is how I said, a commitment, and not to disappoint the acts of the people who turn to the left, who have changed their minds, and they're seeing for the first time, maybe ever, since the last time it was 1956 or 58, when the Greek United Left back then took a 25% of the vote. Now the left has got 35% of the vote, and on total, if we add up all the left forces, and there's a potential of even being higher. So I don't want to see this movement getting disappointed, either from or getting crushed for the worst scenario that we've been discussing. And I'm now passing, I think I've got more time, yes, a bit, to the part which is also a big consideration and a big fear for many of us who have been on the streets and have been following the Greek elections, which is the rise of the neo-Nazi fascist Golden Dawn party. This party that has been actually a gang of street thugs with roots deep into the Greek nationalist movement in the past, the very same people that were the leadership of during the youth in the dictatorship, and who go all the way back to some theoretical leaders of Greek fascism in Greece, are now on the top of this leadership, and their rank and file is filled with street thugs, people convicted again and again and again for attacks on immigrants, for attacks on people on the left, or for attacks on Jews, homosexuals, of course. Yeah. And there could be no mistake about this, that Golden Dawn consists of all these things, and they have no problem showing this. So, as we say, they were, just before the elections, they tried to appear as an anti-systematic. They used, the slogan was Golden Dawn, so we clean the place, so we clean the country, which is, it's very horrible if you think of it, because what they consider dirty is actually every voice, every democratic, progressive, left-leaning, other ethnicity that they consider unclean, that needs to be purged from the land. And but that appeal, because it's so vague, appealed to so many people who have been fed up with the corruption, with the politicians, and in some sense they appeal to the darkest and inner sphere of the immigrants, and how they've been portrayed by the mainstream media. The media played their role in this. Anybody who is now coming out from the mainstream parties and says we are terrorized by the rise of the Golden Dawn have to stay back and see the videos of themselves talking about the health bomb imposed by the immigrants living 30 and 40 together in an apartment, or the terror of the security of the old ladies being robbed and stabbed by foreigners, or even, for that matter, for some women prostitutes who have been found HIV positive and has been demonized, like showing their faces everywhere, practically embarrassed, humiliated as human beings, because they were just happened to be immigrants and being HIV positive. So all this fed into this hysteria, and of course, if some people are buying into this, they're going to go for the more hardcore choice, which was the Golden Dawn at the point. Their militarization appeared to some of the people, and especially to some of the youth. And we have to be clear that all of the 7% that voted for the Golden Dawn, I think not of them are all fascists. It's not something we're going to go out and we'll see columns upon columns of black shirts marching down the streets. They are street thugs. They have now they have some more confidence, and it's up to the broader, not only the narrow left, but the broader progressive and democratic forces within the universities, within schools, especially hospitals. The hospitals came out today, the trade unions, and said we are going to continue giving treating patients no matter if they have papers or not, because we're not giving you the intimidation from the Golden Dawn. This is one small victory, one small example, but it shows that people should be determined to take a stand against any intimidation. It's as a similar stand as the journalists did when they were intimidated to standing up when the Nazi leaders walked into the room to give a press conference. So, and yes, this is another thing that there should be an initiative about immediately taken in Greece, without any thoughts, without with no waiting, because any moment that we are taking into to think, they will march forward, that there will be more casualties. I know personally that there are many threats into some people on the left, or some people who are homosexual, or some immigrants and so on, and. The police allegedly, or not allegedly, truly, they vote in the polling stations that they went. More than 50% of Greek policemen voted for Golden Dawn, and this is something alarming to only people who haven't been in the streets, haven't seen how the police treat us, and when they treat demonstrators and like less than rubbish. So this gives us no illusion that even if there is a progressive government, it would deal away with a Golden Dawn on its own. So I would like to open up to the speakers now, because we laid out there are so many details and so many things to discuss around it, and I would really like to hear all your questions and all your remarks on today's speech. I'm waiting. Thank you.